Thank you for joining us. I hope that you are doing well. We have moved out of the minor prophets of the Old Testament, and we've moved to a different book of the Bible that is just jam-packed with stories. It is the book of 2 Kings. And there are so many stories that I could choose to do a little devotional thought on. But in the end, I had to go with the story in here that is one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. Top 5, for sure. It's in 2 Kings chapter 6. A little bit of context for this story. Elisha is a prophet in the land of Israel at a time when the Israelites are warring with the Arameans. And we learn in the story that the Aramean king is very frustrated because every time he sends his army to go attack the Israelites have already prepared for the attack. They've showed up with armies that are even greater than what he has, and he can't figure it out. How do they know what his plans are? Well, he learns that the Israelites, they have a prophet named Elisha, who tells the Israelite king what the plans of the Arameans are well in advance. So the Aramean king thinks to himself, I know what I'll do. I'll take out Elisha. If Elisha is out of the way, then I'll be able to defeat Israel, which makes sense. So the story picks up in 2 Kings 6. We will be in verse 13. And the king of Aram said to his servants, Go and see where he, Elisha, is, that I may send and seize him. It was told him, Behold, he is in Dothan. So the king sent their horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night and surrounded the city. So Elisha's just hanging out in the little city of Dothan, and in the middle of the night, an ambush is prepared. When the servant of Elisha rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, Alas, my master, what shall we do? Elisha said, Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. The servant is now just concerned that Elisha has spent too much time in the sun. His statement is loony. The little city of Dothan stands no chance against this giant army that is outside. Well, instead of just winking and leaving his poor servant terrified, Elisha prays a remarkable prayer in verse 17. Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. You can read the rest of this story later. It's actually kind of an amusing ending. God strikes the army blind, and then Elisha misdirects them to Samaria, where he prepares them a feast, gets them drunk, and then sends them away, never to return again. It's super weird. But verse 17 is where I want to focus. What I love about this verse is that Elisha knows what to pray for. You'll notice he doesn't pray for annihilation. Lord, smite this army. Send mosquitoes into their camp. He doesn't pray for salvation either. Lord, whisk us away to another city that we might be saved. And he also doesn't pray for a heavenly army to appear and save them. Rather, he merely prays that his servant's eyes would be opened to what is already there. And God answers this prayer. As I look at this story, I see a story of circles that applies to you and to me. A visual to help us out here. This dot here is Elisha's servant. And for the illustration I'm drawing, this dot is you. The larger circle around the dot is Dothan in the story, the city that the servant is in. And I want this circle to represent your world. It's everything you interact with, people you know, places you go, everything in your physical, social, and mental bubble. But there's another circle, right? Your world is pressured by another force, an enemy force. In the story, it's the Aramean army encircled around the city, ready to attack. For us, this is a spiritual enemy. Your sin, your temptation, your baggage, your troubles, your worries, your negativity, the battles that you fight. and the enemy is closing in. Maybe you feel this opposition pressing in around you. Your defense isn't strong enough. You don't know how long you can withstand. And just to pause here for a moment, I think it's important that we register the enemy in our own lives. Many times people are in denial about what's dragging them down because to confront those things is uncomfortable and unpleasant. And I get it. It can be discouraging to see sin and negativity and temptation in our lives, so we ignore it. And when challenged, we defend our motives and we distract ourselves instead of honestly assessing our spiritual life. But an important part of spiritual growth is recognizing where we are weakest and most vulnerable. Or to put it in language of the story, it's only when you see an enemy surrounding you in every direction that you have need for the mountains to be filled with a heavenly army. And that's the final circle. It's God. It's a heavenly army, bigger than the rest, surrounding you, surrounding your world, and surrounding the enemy trying to bring you down is a mountain full of horses and chariots of fire. And this army is fighting for you. Do you remember this symbol from grade school math? The greater than symbol? There were always creative ways to remember which direction it went. I remember it's the mouth of a giant crocodile, and the hungry crocodile always wants to eat the bigger meal, so its mouth opens for the bigger number. That one always distracted me because I would doodle an alligator on all of my tests, trying to make it make sense. Another trick was to view it like an arrow. The bigger bully number always shoots an arrow at the smaller, weaker number, so point the arrow at the small fry. Great lesson for children. I show you this to say, the greater than symbol very much applies to this third circle because God's army is greater than in every way. The Aramean army has horses and fiercely crafted chariots, but God's army has horses and chariots of fire. The Aramean army snuck in unseen in the middle of the night, but God's army is invisible in the morning sun. The Aramean army surrounds the entire city, but God's army fills the mountains around both the city and the enemy army. And this is the best news of all. No matter how big the enemy army is, God's army is always bigger. The enemy may be stacking more forces against you than ever before, but God's presence simply becomes all the larger. God is greater than your worries, greater than your doubts, greater than your sin, greater than your loss, greater than everything that pulls you down. Though you are who you are, God says back, I am what I am. We talked about already how some people ignore the enemy. They live in denial. But there's an opposite extreme where we can focus too much on the enemy. We focus on our temptations and on our burdens and on our losses, the enemy that's at the gates. But we don't focus on God's power and God's providence and God's promises. There was this Olympic rifle shooter named Matt Emmons during the 2004 Olympic Games. And he was in the final rounds and he was killing the competition. Not literally, let's be clear here. They fire at targets, not each other. His scores put him well in the lead, let's put it that way. And it came down to his final shot. He didn't even need a bullseye. He basically just needed to hit the target and he would walk home with the gold. So he lined up, he took careful aim, he fired. He nailed it. But standing in lane 2, he had nailed the target in lane 3. He stood in confusion, thinking that he had fired at the right target as the judges recorded a score of 0 for him, and he finished in 8th place. Yikes. I think that we too might focus on the wrong thing sometimes. Do we focus on the enemy because of our weakness, or do we focus on God because of his strength? Which leads to the question for today. In trouble, where do you focus? In times of trouble, do you focus on your own weakness? Or do you focus on what stands against you, the strength of the enemy? Or do you focus on the might and the power of God? If you remember nothing else, remember this. You don't have to call in God's forces when you start to feel the pressure. He's already there. And when you can't see that, pray a prayer like Elisha, that your eyes would be opened to see him at work. This is not your world. This is not your world. This is your world. In the words of Paul, what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Do not be afraid, for those who are with you are more than those who are with them. Wow, I just love this story. We are going to pick the book of the Bible that we're going to next via my fancy randomizer on my computer. The book we're going to next is Hosea. Back to the Minor Prophets. I knew I couldn't escape. All right, subscribe to this channel, like our Facebook page, so you can keep getting these every single morning. Thank you for tuning in.